everyone. I would like to call to order the Winston-Salem Urban Area Transportation Coordinating Committee meeting. Hope everyone is doing well. All right, today's agenda. Well, let me start with the virtual statement first. Due to the pandemic, members of the Winston-Salem Urban Area Transportation Coordinating Committee are participating virtually. All members will vote by a roll call. Each member will be recognized, and at that time, we ask that the member please state his or her vote. I will now ask Kelly to take the roll, please.
Yes, ma'am. Kelly Bennett.
Here.
Jordan Payne.
Here.
I'm assuming you're here instead of Carrie.
Yeah, well, he's doing an air quality forecast right now. So he might be here a little bit.
So you'll be the voting member then. Okay.
For now.
So, Tanik is here. Andy Bailey.
Here.
Pat Ivy.
Here.
I'm here. Kirk Erickson.
Present.
Lee Rollins.
Here.
Nasser. I see you and I think you're saying something. Chris Jensen.
Good afternoon.
Stacy Tolbert.
Here.
Misty Meadows.
I'm here.
And Scott Ryan. Scott Ryan. Okay. Did I miss anybody else that's a voting member? I see Scott Snow is on the call. Scott Snow.
Kelly, this is Mark. If Scott's not available, I am here.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. And I think that concludes it. We do have quorum.
Very good. Well, thank you, everyone. Let's see, at this time, we would have public comments. Kelly, is there anyone that's indicated from the public that they wanted to speak at this time?
No, ma'am.
All right, is there anyone on this call who was wanting to speak? Any new introductions? No? Okay, very good. All right, then we will jump into our meeting. We actually have 3 action items, 6 information items for future action, 1 information item that requires no action, and then staff reports. So we will start with our first action item, which is the consideration of the March 17th, 2022 TCC meeting minutes. The meeting minutes are enclosed. Unless anyone has any corrections or comments, would someone like to make a motion for acceptance? I'll make a motion.
Pat Ivy.
Thank you, Pat. Is there a second?
Scott Snow, second.
Thank you, Scott. All right, it has been moved and seconded that we accept the minutes as enclosed. Kelly, can you please call the roll?
Absolutely. Kelly Bennett.
Yes.
Jordan Payne.
Yes.
Tanik.
Yes.
Andy Bailey.
Yes.
Pat made the motion. I vote yes. Kirk Erickson.
Yes.
Lee Rollins.
Yes.
Nasser.
Yes.
Chris Jensen.
Yes.
Stacy Tolbert,
Yes.
Misty Meadows,
Yes.
Scott made the second, Scott Snow that is, Mark Ursner,
Yes.
Donna Woodson,
Yes.
that's unanimous.
Very good, thank you. All right, we will move to our next item, which is a consideration of the 2022 Surface Transportation Block Grant Direct Attributable and Transportation Alternatives Direct Attributable Call for Projects. Matthew Burchett will cover this item, please.
Yeah, thank you, Tanique. Good afternoon, everybody. The Winston-Salem Urban Area Metropolitan Planning Organization has the authority to program available surface transportation block grant direct attributable and transportation alternatives direct attributable funds for transportation planning, bicycle, greenway, sidewalk, street and highway, transit, and other projects in the urban area. On January 4th of this year, MPO staff announced a call for projects to begin the process of programming approximately $17 million in STBG DA and TAP DA funds. In February of this year, MPO communities submitted those projects, which included 11 sidewalk candidate projects, 3 greenway candidate projects, 2 intersection projects, 1 small roadway project, and 1 transit project for funding consideration through the call for projects. The total amount of federal funds requested was approximately $28 million. The projects were reviewed and evaluated by a committee that included the MPO's Planning Development Coordinator and Bicycle and Pedestrian Coordinator, City of Winston-Salem engineering staff, Town of Walkertown staff, and Ncdot Division 9 proposals engineer and the project development engineer, and also a member of the public. The review committee agreed on a recommendation to fund 11 projects across 5 agencies and organizations. The review committee also agreed to set aside the funds originally reserved for Davidson County Transit as a planning fund reserve since DCT had declined those funds. The tables are attached to this item, and they show the list of ranked projects and the proposed funding strategy. The next steps, of course, with this action item are to approve these candidate projects, and then the next step would be to program and amend the Mtip accordingly. So I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about this, the process or the projects that have been identified for funding.
Very good. Are there any questions for Matthew? All right, would anyone like to entertain a motion on this item?
So moved, Kirk.
Thank you, Kurt. Is there a second?
Donna second.
Thank you, Donna. All right, it's been properly moved and seconded that we would accept this item. Kelly, please call the roll for the vote.
Kelly Bennett,
Yes.
Jordan Payne,
Yes.
Tanique,
Yes.
Andy Bailey,
Yes.
Pat Ivy,
Yes.
I vote yes. Kirk made the motion. Lee Rollins,
Yes.
Nasser,
Yes.
Chris Jensen,
Yes.
Stacy Tolbert,
Yes.
Misty Meadows,
Yes.
Scott Snow,
Yes.
Mark Kersner,
Yes.
Donna made the second, and so that's unanimous.
Very good, thank you. Before we move on to the next item, I just ask that everybody take a minute just to look at the clarity and details of all the maps enclosed for all of the projects. Kudos to the staff for your preparation on those items. I thought they did a really good job. Just wanted to point that out. All right. I will move on to the next item, which is the.
I'm sorry. Can I interrupt real quick? This is Kerry Gentry. I'm
Absolutely
on
can.
now. I was having some computer problems. I'm on now, so I can vote. So sorry. Late.
Very good, Carrie. Welcome. And yeah, thank you for joining us. All right. We will move on to our next action item, which is a consideration of a request to support the North Carolina Clean Energy Center's efforts to create a fourth Clean Cities Coalition in North Carolina to represent the Winston-Salem urban area and other underrepresented regions of the state. Matthew Burchak will cover this item as well.
All right, thank you again, Tanique. The North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center has a mission to advance a sustainable energy economy by educating, demonstrating, and providing support for clean energy technologies, practices, and policies. The NCCETC currently collaborates with 3 Clean Cities coalitions in the state, which cover the Charlotte, Raleigh-Durham, and Asheville metropolitan areas. Clean Cities coalitions were originally created by the U.S. Department of Energy to help reduce reliance on petroleum products and to improve air quality. Currently, though, only 44% of the state's population is covered by those 3 existing coalitions. The fourth Clean Cities Coalition, the proposed fourth Clean Cities Coalition, would cover an additional 45% of the state's population, and NCCETC is seeking partners to help form that. That organization has asked the Winston-Salem Urban Area MPO to support the formation of the new Clean Cities Coalition to expand those opportunities for clean fleets, alternative fuels, and sustainable transportation across the state. There's no financial commitment required of our MPO, and in return for our support, member jurisdictions will have access to resources providing guidance on methods to improve the efficiency and sustainability of fleet vehicles. There are a number of other resources that would be available to our communities as well, and that would all be covered under the Clean Cities Coalition. So I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about this effort.
Thank you, Matthew. Are there any questions for Matthew? Hearing none, would anyone like to entertain a vote? Or make a motion for a vote? Make a motion, I'm sorry.
A motion for approval.
Who is that?
Nasser.
Okay, thank you, Nasser. Is there a second?
Scott Snow, second.
Thank you, Scott. All right, it has been properly moved and seconded that we accept this item. Kelly, please call the roll for the vote.
Kelly Bennett,
Yes.
Carrie Gentry, Carrie,
Yeah, yes.
Tanique,
Yes.
Andy Bailey,
Yes.
Pat Ivy,
Yes.
I vote yes. Kirk Erickson,
Yes.
Lee Rollins,
Yes.
Nasser voted yes. Chris Jensen,
Yes.
Stacy Tolbert,
Yes.
Misty Meadows,
Yes.
Scott Snow voted yes. Mark Kirsner,
Yes.
Donna Woodson.
Yes.
That is unanimous.
Very good. Thank you, everyone. All right. We will move to our information items for future action. So item number 5 is the review of the fiscal year 2020 through 2029 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program amendments and modifications for the Winston-Salem urban area, MPO. Byron Brown will cover this item.
Good afternoon, everyone. For this item, the 2020 to 2029 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program is a listing of all the projects programmed for the Winston-Salem urban area. This document is a subset of the 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Plan and reflects projects programming into the state's Transportation Improvement Program. Ncdot regularly updates the STIP to include new projects and modify existing ones. This can be done for reasons such as funding, municipal requests, or schedule changes. Statewide projects are projects which are located in our planning area. As their schedules, funding, and programming is modified, these are reflected in our Mtip. Including your materials are projects, project modifications, additions, deletions, including the addition of funding for various statewide programs at the request of IMD. Depot Street in Walkertown, sidewalk construction is delayed for additional planning and design. Louisville Vienna Road in Louisville, the intersection conversion to a single lane roundabout has been delayed for additional planning and design. These amendments were made available for the public to review from April 11th 2022 to May 12th, 2022, per our public participation policy. No comments were received during that time. This is an information item, so we'll come back for action at the next meeting. I'll take any questions.
Very good. Byron, thank you. Are there any questions for Byron? All right. Hearing none, I will move to the next item, which is the review of a request to modify the Winston-Salem urban area fiscal year 2017 through 2026 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program for fiscal year 2018 and 2019 job access and reverse commute projects and fiscal years 2017, 2018, and 2019 section 5310 projects for reallocation. Matt Duchesne will cover this item.
Thanks, Denise. Good afternoon, everybody. Just for clarification, there will need to be an Mtip modification because the scope of work and total amount of grant funding has not changed. But moving on from that, so this is the Winston-Salem Urban Area Metropolitan Planning Organization staff was requesting the reallocation of funding for several awards across FTA Section 5310 and 5307 JARC projects. Subrecipients utilize 5310 and 5307 JARC funding to provide transportation access for the elderly, for individuals with disabilities, and for individuals requiring transportation to access jobs where they would otherwise not have access. Redistributing these funds to subrecipients, we are certain we'll be able to use these funds to support community needs as one of the primary goals in transit management, so the prior year funding grants can be closed. This will also allow for easier transition processes in future fiscal years. For fiscal year 1953-10, the town of Kernersville will relinquish $45,000, which will be redistributed to 3 other subrecipients due to outstanding reimbursement balances for previous years. For fiscal years 17 and 18, 5310, Wake Forest Baptist Health Campus will relinquish $89,005 from both years because use of this funding was not pursued by them. For fiscal year 20, JARC, Horizons Residential Care. For fiscal year 2019, JARC Community Transportation Program. And for fiscal year 2018, JARC Winston-Salem Urban League will relinquish reimbursement awards, and those funds will be redistributed. Horizons cannot meet the intended uses of the funding, while the other 2 organizations were affected by COVID-19. The attached tables reference what subrecipients are having their funds redistributed, as well as which subrecipients will be receiving further funds for future reimbursement. This item will be brought to TAC as a group, so many reallocations can take place at one time and make way for further and more efficient reallocations as needed. I'm happy to take any questions on this matter.
All right, thank you, Matt. Did you share with the group that we had a correction and it's online for the attachments?
Not specifically, but yes, that correction is online.
Okay.
I did list the years that were added in the action request.
All right, very good. Any questions for Matt? Hearing none, we will move to the next item, which is the review of the Federal Transit Administration Formula Grant Section 5307 funding allocations for the Winston-Salem urban area for fiscal year 2022 and plans to amend the Mtip. Matt Duchesne will cover this item as well.
So transit systems located in urbanized areas of more than 200,000 in population are eligible to use FTA Section 5307 funds for operating capital assistance. FTA announced an allocation of $6,703,372 for fiscal year 2022. There currently are 3 transit agencies in the MPO eligible to receive 5307 funding based upon data reported to the National Transit Database, and those 3 are Davidson County Transportation, Piedmont Authority for Regional Transportation, or PART, and Winston-Salem Transit Authority, or WISTA. The number of eligible agencies may increase in future years. Additionally, activities traditionally eligible under JARC, which provides for job access for low-income individuals, continue to be an eligible activity for these funds. Based upon policies adopted by the MPO in 2017, funding will be distributed in accordance with the percentages developed by FTA as shown in the attached table. Based upon percentages in that table, it is recommended that Davidson County receive $240,138, PART receive $746,080, and WISTA receive $5,661,554. and the last $55,000 will be used for JARC programs. Each year, MPO staff shall coordinate a joint allocation meeting with eligible agencies to confirm that the funding identified can be used by the agency, and staff will use that information for recommendation to the TAC for final approval and distribution. MPO staff has coordinated a meeting with the 3 transit agencies, and all 3 agreed with the funding recommendations provided. Staff will also recommend approval of an amendment to the Mtip. Happy to take any questions on this as well.
All right, any questions for Matt on this item? All right, thank you. We will move to our next item, which is item number 8, review of the Federal Transit Administration Section 5339 Bus and Bus Facilities Grant Program Funding Allocation for the Winston-Salem urban area for fiscal year 2022, and plans to amend the Mtip. Matt Duchesne will cover this item as well. Matt?
All right. Yep. The Federal Transit Administration Section 5339 program is a formula-based grant program to replace, rehabilitate, and purchase buses and bus facilities. The program provides available federal resources to eligible direct recipients that operate fixed-route bus services or that allocate funding to fixed-route bus operators. The program originated through the Moving Ahead for Progress on the 21st Century Act, or MAP 21, which changed the program from discretionary to formula-based. Funding is now designated to states and designated recipients in urbanized areas of 200,000 people or more. The Winston-Salem urban area is eligible to receive $556,276 in fiscal year 2022. WISTA is requesting to use the available funds to purchase 3 Transaid vans to replace aging fleet, and the remaining funds for transit facility rehabilitation projects and capital maintenance. In accordance with federal standards, the program of projects outlines how WISTA will use these funds and public participation requirements. Public participation period will be held for 30 days between May 23rd and June 23rd of 2022. Public hearing is scheduled to occur at the TAC meeting on July 18th, 2022 to provide maximum opportunities for public engagement and feedback. In order for us to have these funds available, the following steps must be followed to include approval by the TAC, program and amending of the Mtip, and the 2029 STIP, and submission to FTA. I can take any questions on this as well.
Thank you, Matt. Are there any questions for Matt on this item? Very quiet group this afternoon. All right, we will move on to our next item, which is the review of an amendment to the Winston-Salem urban area fiscal year 2020 and through 2029 Mtip to adjust surface transportation block grant direct attributable funding for 3 select projects in the village of Clemens. And Matthew Burchek will cover this item.
Thank you, Tanique. So the Village of Clemens is requesting additional funding for 2 complementary sidewalk projects along Harper Road. The STIP numbers for those are EB 5960 and EB 6040. The scope of these projects includes the design and construction of sidewalk from Frank Morgan Elementary School to the Jerry Long YMCA, and from Village Point Drive to east of the I-40 interchange, respectively. Both of these projects were evaluated, recommended, and approved for DA funding in previous years by the MPO's TAC. The Village of Clemens wishes to transfer all surface transportation block grant DA funds from Project U4741 PE, which is the Highway 158 sidewalk in Yadkin River Greenway, phase 1 of that project, to the above mentioned projects, EB 5960 and EB 6040. The village would like to transfer $738,640 in federal funds to EB 6040 and $1,371,760 in federal funds to EB 5960. The proposed total federal funding amount for EB 6040 and EB 5960 are $1,269,840 and $2,371,760 respectively. The village has provided a few reasons for canceling that U4741 PE project. You can see those listed there. Some periods of inactivity due to funding uncertainty, significant increases in the cost to deliver the project, and the potential for road expansion by Ncdot. The Village of Clemens will repay the already expended DA amount of $181,121 incurred under U4741 PE. Also, the village is prepared to contribute $527,600 to the projects to account for the 20% local match required for the federal funding portion of $2,110,400. Attached to this item are two memos from the Village of Clemens detailing the request to transfer those funds, along with some other information. So happy to answer any questions you may have about that, though this is an information item.
Thank you, Matthew. Are there any questions for Matthew related to this item? Very good. Hearing none, we will move on to item number 10, which is a review of the draft 2024 through 2033 State Transportation Improvement Program. And this will be Kelly Garvin and Pat Ivy. Kelly, do you want to introduce the item?
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. As we may all know already, the North Carolina Department of Transportation released the draft 2024-2023 STIP. The STIP identifies the construction, funding for, and scheduling of transportation projects at the state level for over a 10-year period. Ncdot proactively updates the STIPs every 2 years to ensure that it reflects the state's current financial situation. STI law, the Strategic Transportation Investment Law, mandates the ongoing evaluation and improvement of the STIP to ensure that its process continues to be responsive to North Carolina's diverse needs. This is accomplished through a process known as strategic prioritization. We were in the 6th iteration of that process, known as P6.0, which began in the fall of 2019, when Ncdot and local planning organizations asked for feedback on and later submitted projects to be evaluated for the new STIP. In August of 2021, the Board of Transportation concurred with the recommendation to halt the P6.0 process due to the rising costs of transportation projects. Instead, the prioritization work group, which is made up of NPO division staff and Ncdot staff, worked to refine the current STIP to make it more fiscally constrained. The new STIP, therefore, doesn't contain any new projects. It's just a reprioritization of existing projects based on their current schedule and the cycle that the project was committed in, as well as the updated cost estimates. I have shared with you all the new draft STIP, and Pat is prepared to make a presentation on how that STIP came about. Pat, I'll give it to you.
Kelly, I appreciate it. I think Byron's going to put the presentation on the screen for us. I will say Kelly did a good job giving an introduction on this thing. Obviously, there's a lot of changes this year, and the presentation, the slides that I'm gonna show. Go ahead to the next one, if you would. Slides that I'm going to show are going to give you some information on the background, talk about how we developed the TIP, talk about the new format that Kelly spoke about, review information on the prioritization status and how that was determined, and most importantly, talk about the next steps in the schedule. And at the end, of course, there'll be time for some questions if I can help answer those as well. Much of the information in this presentation, some of you may have already seen, but given the importance of it, I think probably repetition is not a bad thing at all. So next slide. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, just give you some fundamentals that have been shared with everybody. First of all, this exercise is really more of a programming or a planning issue. It is definitely not a cash issue like we saw in the latter part of the last decade. DOT, as you know, has a cash balance of over $2 billion right now, and the required 4-year federal STIP 2020 to 2023 does remain fiscally constrained. It's also important for everybody to understand that at this time, we do not anticipate any impacts to projects that are scheduled to be let in years 22 and 23. We obviously are, we being the division and our Raleigh staff continues to coordinate with local governments through the MPOs and RPOs, and the P6 prioritization work group, of which I'm a member, continues to meet on occasion and is consulted on these on this particular TIP as well. As we said, the initial draft 2024-33 STIP was released on April 25th, and we do anticipate the revised or final draft to be finalized and released in December of this year. And when I talk about, just going back up, when I talk about the projects, the pre-2024 lettings, that includes projects such as the last segment of the Eastern Beltway 2579 AA and the U2729 Haynes Mill Road widening project. Next slide. Some of the STIP budget changes that we've talked about, but just as a reminder, back in 2020 and maybe before, the COVID pandemic did affect our revenue significantly. Some $8 billion in cost increases that we've experienced since July of 2020. We did update over 11,000 project estimates. Many of the increases were due to outdated or low cost estimates, and but importantly, we do have new processes in place to ensure more accurate estimates moving forward. Now, the new budgets that we're going to talk about today provided $3.8 billion in additional revenue, provided mainly by the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, and also some additional funding provided in the state budget. The Board of Transportation also approved changing our 1% compounded annually inflation adjustment to 3%, and that had about a $2.5 billion impact on the $2 billion, or the 10-year program as well. Next slide. You all have seen this slide before, but just as a reminder, here's a graphic representation of the 22 funding categories that we talk about under STI. As you all know, there are those three main categories: 40% statewide mobility, 30% regional impact divided in the 7 funding regions, and 30% division needs, which has 14 funding categories for each of the funding divisions. And you see the different types of projects that are included in each of those. Next slide. This is the crux of what precipitated the draft 2024-33 STIP, the funding availability for committed projects. As you can see here, in each of these funding categories, I have statewide circled there, the Region D, which includes Divisions 7 and 9, over programmed by nearly $600 million. And then, but some good news on the division needs category for Division 9. We're actually $31 million under program. So we're one of about a handful of divisions that actually saw some availability of additional funding there. And I'll talk about how that is being used moving forward. Next slide. And the next. So some of the overall goals from the prioritization work group: number 1 was to develop a trustworthy and dependable STIP, which was fiscally constrained. That's a requirement. To produce the 24-33 STIP using current TIP, the current TIP project list, through a transparent process. Have an opportunity to fund new projects in P7 scoring in all of the 22 STI funding categories, and very importantly, to ensure that this process is grounded in state and federal requirements. Next slide. So the framework for the 2024-2033 STIP development, as we said before, it only includes projects funded in the current 2020-29 STIP. Projects selected for funding were selected for funding using one of two approaches. Number one, delivery projects. Those were programmed first, and that includes projects that were currently scheduled for construction in fiscal years 24, 25, or 26, or had right-of-way underway or a federal grant that was tied to these projects. And then second, the work group agreed to do sort of a seniority approach, beginning with prioritization 3, then going with P4 and P5, the evaluation of those projects. That's how we began the second part or second half of the TIP. We also have an opportunity to swap projects on projects that are agreed to by DOT and the planning organizations. The cost of these projects swapped must be within 10% of the cost of the projects being swapped out. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. Next slide. So some general observations from the 2024-2033 STIP development. Delivery projects. I thought it was very important to show that the schedules for more than 80% of these projects did not change. And you'll see that in, you've seen that hopefully in the document itself, and then in a future slide that I'm going to talk about as well. The P3, P4, P5 evaluation, under that, schedules of 34% of those projects did not change. And the number and length of schedule changes varied depending on the STI funding category. Now, I want to spend just a minute talking about this other category, where it says some non-committed projects were programmed to meet STI minimum funding requirements. Because remember, we said before, only committed projects were going to be included in this draft TIP. Well, in order to meet the STI law requirements that we program a minimum of 80%, 85% of the available funds in each STI category in the first 5 years of the STIP, and a minimum of 90% of the available funds in the 10-year program, we had to fund some non-committed projects in several divisions. Now, if you recall from the previous slide, there were several divisions, including Division 9, in the division needs category that were under-programmed with just committed projects. So in these divisions, we had to fund some non-committed projects to meet the STI law requirement. Now, as an example, in Division 9, we did require one non-committed project, which was P5751, in order to meet that requirement. That is a rail crossing project. That is just an example, but those were rare. But that was so that we could meet the STI law requirements on those minimum percentages. Next slide. This, they put in this visual example, so I'll talk a little bit about this on how we went from scratch, the delivery projects, and then the remaining seniority projects. So next slide, Byron. Obviously, the first projects were delivery projects, and these were projects that were currently scheduled, as a reminder, for either construction in fiscal years 24, 25, 26, right-of-way underway, or has a federal grant tied to it. Next slide. Then we started with the P3, P4, P5 evaluation, or that seniority approach, starting again from 3, then went to 4, and then went to 5, depending on when the funding level was reached for each of those funding categories. Next. And then, of course, we've not gotten to this point yet, but obviously the MPOs have the ability to look at possibly swapping projects out. Example here is you don't want a P4 project, but there's a P5 project that you would prefer. If those projects are about the same cost, approximate time frame, and the division and the Raleigh offices, we all agree on that. That is something that we could work out, as you see on the next slide. And so we have actually met and spoken with some some MPO personnel. There may be some opportunities, but I believe that these opportunities will be rare, mainly because of the cost of some of these projects. Trying to find an equal cost project to swap out in an initial review, that's going to be pretty difficult to do that. But we are all willing to take a look at those to see if that is a possibility. So next slide. And next. So talking about the TIP format, this is probably the one thing that we've gotten the most kudos for in changing it from the old format that everybody is used to, although it was very, very difficult to maneuver, especially people that were not familiar with the TIP process. So next slide. We went to the new Excel-based format that you all have. The benefits of that is, number one, it's easier to read, but it's also searchable and sortable, and it can be printed on ledger size 11 by 17 paper as well. So next slide. So let's talk about the prioritization status and talk a little bit about that. Now, the Board of Transportation did also agree with the work group recommendation to go to a 5-year delivery, or what we used to call committed window. Now, projects with the first year of right-of-way or construction in fiscal year 2028 or earlier were considered scheduled for delivery, or committed as we used to call it. Projects with first year of right-of-way and construction in 2029 or later are in the program for preliminary engineering, and those projects will have to be reprioritized in Prioritization 7.0. Next slide. You can see that graphically in the actual TIP document under the current prioritization status tab that you all have, and you see that listed there. Again, just for review, prioritization status is actually based on the schedule. So projects with right-of-way of construction 2024 to 28 are scheduled for delivery and do not have to be prioritized. Any projects that are funded for preliminary engineering only will have to be reprioritized. And also any projects that you see in the document that are not funded, or projects that fell out of the 10-year project program, will also have to be reprioritized. So next slide. I wanted to give you a few examples locally of each of these different categories so that you can see what I'm talking about. So delivery projects that are currently scheduled from 2024 to 2028. Examples of projects that remain on schedule are R2577A, the US 158 widening project, the Great Wagon Road project in Louisville, the Big Mill Farm Hopkins Road project, U5760 in Kernersville, Louisville Clemens Road improvements, U6004, Forum Parkway in Rural Hall, U5899. All those projects remain on schedule. The one project that did see a delay was I-5880, which was the I-40 NC-109 interchange project. Construction on the project was delayed by 5 years, and that is mainly because of the funding category that it was included. All the project, or most of the projects above, were division needs level projects. I-5880 was, I believe, a regional project, and we simply ran out of funding in that category and had to delay this project. The following projects are scheduled for preliminary engineering only, or 2029 to 33. These are Beltway projects, Western Beltway projects, segments EA, D, and CA. All of those were projects included in the current TIP, but they will have to be reprioritized, and they did see a schedule delay, as you can see. Now, unfortunately, we also saw 3 projects on the Western Beltway section CB, B, and A that fell out of the 10-year program altogether post 2023. Those will also be reprioritized under 7.0 and hopefully we can get those pulled back into the 10-year program. So anyway, we'll have some opportunity for some questions afterwards, but I want to finish through the presentation. Next slide. Our next steps. We did have the local officials education webinar yesterday. Quite a few folks attended that. We are also working with MPO staff on a possible TIP coordination meeting between the division, Raleigh staff, and the MPO. Project swaps, if we find any that we want to consider, those do have to be submitted to STIP managers in Raleigh by September 30th. And as I said before, the revised draft STIP is going to be released in December of 22. We will also have opportunities for public involvement prior to the approval of the final 2024 STIP that will be adopted by the Board of Transportation in the summer of 2023. Next slide. And we are right on the heels of the next steps of Prioritization 7.0. The new work group will be assigned and will likely begin their work in the fall of this year. And the results of 7.0 will be used to generate the next 2-year cycle of the TIP 2026 to 2035. And we anticipate the submittal window for new projects will be the summer of 2023. And we anticipate P7 quantitative scores and mobility programming to be in the spring of 2024. So the last slide that I've got is a graphical schedule for you all to keep and refer back to. Obviously, we're at the very beginning here. We've got a lot of work to do as we go through the remainder of this cycle, P6.0, and then the 7.0 cycle there. So it's a lot of information. Any questions that we did not go through, obviously, the TIP itself. There's a lot of information there, but any questions from members of the group here today?
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Kelly.
That either means they're overwhelmed or I covered everything well.
I thought at least you would get one question, Pat, so I'm surprised.
Well, there'll be many other opportunities, I'm sure.
Yes. See any projects they think they want to swap so that we can have those meetings? Was it the end of this month? Did you want to share that?
Yes, ma'am.
Deadline?
Yes, so given the information that Pat just shared, we will be sending out this presentation for you guys for your review as well. And hopefully everybody is reviewing the STIP that was already shared. And we wanted to hear back from staff from different communities to let us know by the end of this month. So that puts us at the 31st. If you are interested, if your jurisdiction is interested in swapping a project for another, as Pat mentioned, it has to be a project that's a similar cost and schedule. But if you let us know as soon as possible, then we can help coordinate a meeting between the jurisdiction and Division 9 and MPO staff, because we have to have everything submitted to Ncdot by September. And if we do have swaps, they require action, which is 2 meetings, information and action. So the time frame is a little bit, we're in a time crunch. So please take the time to review the information that was sent and get back to me as soon as possible.
Kelly, I just had a question directly to you, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot or anything, but I see that the thing that Pat did raise was that the STIP draft that they did was a little different. Is the MPO also going to move towards kind of mimicking that as well, in terms of the chart, or
in terms of how our Mtip our Mtip looks?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it. Just curious. Thanks.
All right. Any other questions? Hearing none. Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Kelly. We will then move on to our information item number 11, which is a review of a staff presentation on Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, funding opportunities and relevance to the Winston-Salem Urban Area MPO, and Hunter Stazak will cover this item.
All right, thank you very much, Tanique, and good afternoon, everyone. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, otherwise known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, provides significant funding for major planning and construction projects. By total dollar amount, funding for transportation programs is the largest component of this legislation. MPO staff will provide a presentation to the TCC and TAC focused on funding for transportation programs contained in the IIJA. The presentation will review the basics of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and provide a list of informative resources for implementation at the local level. Staff will also provide a high-level overview of newly established and continued formula funding programs. The presentation will examine select competitive funding opportunities for the MPO's local communities while demonstrating the linkage between select programs and key MTP themes. And so now I guess I'll get into it. Today, I'll be talking with all of you about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and specifically what it means for the MPO. You'll note that today's presentation has been edited to reflect the most current information available as of about 10:30 this morning. So the updated presentation will be shared with all members and available online in the coming days. We're going to try to get through a lot of slides in about 15 minutes, so let's get to it. Next slide. All right. Today we'll discuss what the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is, what it does, the resources that are available to help implement and understand the law. We'll also talk about formula-funded programs that are available to MPO activities, as well as competitive funding opportunities. Some of those will be new and some of those might be familiar. And we'll do it in the context of what are available to the MPO and its communities. Where possible, I will try to tie each of the programs back to projects that are identified in our Metropolitan Transportation Plan or otherwise relevant to our community. Next. So the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is a $1 trillion investment in infrastructure that spans transportation, broadband, water, power, and more. But first and foremost, the bipartisan infrastructure law is really a transportation law. A majority of the money that is in this law goes to transportation programs, and that's what we'll mostly focus on today. On the transportation side of things, IIJA serves as a reauthorization of surface transportation funding programs, as well as creates and funds new programs. On this slide, you can see all the broad topic areas that's featured in this legislation, and highlighted in orange today is what we'll be speaking about mostly. Before moving on to the next slide, I'd like to highlight that the White House has published a guidebook, and this really gives a high-level overview of each of the programs going beyond just transportation and all of the dozens and dozens of programs that are featured in this law. So definitely recommend looking at that. Next slide. So reading through the guidance that's been provided by DOT and FHWA so far, it indicates that a lot of these programs are going to be driven really by safety, equity, climate and resilience, and multimodal systems. So when we think about the competitive funding application process and even formula-funded projects and prioritizing those, if a project contributes a lot in terms of lives saved or injuries prevented, it will be competitive on the safety front. On the equity front, if a project is contributing to improvements in areas that are traditionally underserved, the project will be competitive in that way. For climate and resilience, we're looking at transportation projects that will help reduce the impacts of flooding or potentially reduce carbon emissions in the construction process. And then finally, multimodal projects, so projects that look beyond just single occupancy vehicle travel, but also pedestrians, bicyclists, and so on. these will all matter for competitive funding. So we'll keep that kind of top of mind as we go through each of these programs. And so here, this slide is mostly just intended to show how the infrastructure law looks by the numbers, particularly in terms of new funding. On the right, you can see that about $284 billion worth of the transportation investments in the law are actually new. So these were not, as part of any, surface transportation reauthorization. These are brand new programs. And within that, you can see that roads and bridges get a lot of the money, followed closely by rail and then transit, but there's also a good amount of money going to safety, EVs, and so on. And in terms of what federal agency is getting the most, we can see it's very clear that DOT is getting the lion's share of the money. So next we'll move on to helpful resources. I wanted to just present a few helpful resources for navigating the IIJA law. The U.S. Department of Transportation is doing a good job of keeping folks updated on when NOFOs are expected. So that top link really talks about what notice of funding opportunities are expected for each program and when. So highly recommend bookmarking that one. And then the rest of the resources are provide for different levels, very good tailored information that could be helpful for your individual municipalities on what programs might be good fits. So next we will look at formula funding to the states. So first, let's talk about the formula funding programs here. You'll see obviously that a lot of familiar programs have been reauthorized, including CMAQ, Disadvantaged Business Enterprises, Surface Transportation Block Grant and Transportation Alternatives. And then at the state level, we see that, the National Highway Performance Program, Highway Freight Program, and Highway Safety Improvement Programs that all focus pretty broadly on the national highway system. All of those have been reauthorized as well. The Highway Safety Program and National Priority Safety Programs that are administered by NHTSA have also been reauthorized. And even though the MPO may not deal with this funding directly, the community certainly does enjoy in some of the benefits from it. So for example, the State and Community Highway Safety Program, also known as Section 402, is administered by the state's governor's Highway Safety Program. And we saw that in 2022, both the Winston-Salem Police Department and Kernersville Police Department were awarded money for a DWI task force and for enforcement on that front. In orange, you'll see that there are some new formula-based programs that we'd like to keep an eye on. The Bridge Formula Program specifically allocates money to each state to repair bridges that are in poor condition. The National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program will fund the construction of fast chargers. The Protect Program, or Promoting Resilient Operations for Transformative, Efficient, and Cost-Saving Transportation, will allocate money for transportation resiliency projects. And of course, many transit funding programs, including 5307, 5339, and a few more, are also continued under this law. Next. Now, there's also a lot of formula funding that goes to the states and MPOs as well that are continued, specifically the Metropolitan Planning Program, Metropolitan Transportation Program, and statewide transportation planning programs. Each of these are continued and they help MPOs carry out their day-to-day required planning tasks as they relate to federal compliance. And so next, we'll get into the most detailed stretch of this presentation. Here, we'll really just aim to discuss the competitive funding programs where the MPO is listed as an eligible recipient. While MPOs are eligible, we'd also like to emphasize that individual cities, towns, and counties and other municipalities are also eligible to apply for these competitive funding opportunities. For most of these, the state is also an eligible applicant. So partnering with the state is an option for some of these, with the exception of the Safe Streets and Roads for All program, but we'll get into that a little bit more later. One program that you might notice is absent from the coming slides is the RAISE grant program. This is a very versatile program that both MPOs and communities can take advantage of, but because the funding for this year has already passed, we'll exclude it from this presentation to save us some time. Before we move to the next slide, I think it's best to think about the IIJA programs as a 5 years and 5 installments, or put another way, you've got 5 years and 5 chances to apply for projects underneath each of these programs. All right, next slide. So now we'll focus more in detail on a select 8 to 10 programs. The first is the Advanced Transportation Technologies and Innovative Mobility Deployment Program. This is a modification of an existing program that was previously called the Advanced Transportation and Congestion Management Technologies Program, but it is more or less pretty similar. This funds projects that will deploy, install, and operate advanced technologies. It will emphasize intermodal connections, improving the mobility of goods and peoples, and extending the longevity of infrastructure. Projects that will be eligible will be ones that we can show will improve safety, mobility, efficiency, system performance, and infrastructure return on investment. The next steps for this program do remain to be determined at this time, but potential projects that could be eligible under this program include intelligent transportation system projects or micromobility. An example might be in our current MTP, there's a recommendation for Silas Creek Parkway from Haynes Mall Boulevard to Robin Hood Road for advanced signal technologies. So this would be just one example. Of course, there's we're not going to provide an exhaustive list of possibilities because it can go on. This is a cost share program. It is the standard 80% federal, requiring a 20% non-federal or local match. Next. The next program we'll look at is the Bridge Investment Program. This one has $12.5 billion available spread across the next 5 years. And when that money is awarded, it is available for 4 years after. You might think of this as a competitive extension of the Bridge Formula program that we discussed earlier. The goal really is to just replace, rehab, preserve, or protect one or more bridges that are on the National Bridge Inventory, specifically the ones that are in poor condition or at risk of falling into poor condition. On the right, you'll see that I included a map of off-system bridges in poor condition because these are the bridges that are more likely potentially to be city or town maintained. And so because this is an opportunity that is available for local municipalities to apply for, I just wanted to emphasize that. The NOFO is not out yet, but it is expected to be released in May 2022. So do keep an eye on that, and we'll keep everyone here posted on that front. The cost share is expected to be about 80% federal and 20% local match, but large projects are going to be 50-50 splits. Next slide. Next program we'll talk about is the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grants, and this is really a two-part deal. So over the course of the next 5 years, there's going to be $2.5 billion available. The first half of that money goes to corridor charging. These projects will deploy EV charging across designated alternative fuel corridors and in communities. You'll see that in the Winston-Salem MPO, 40 has been designated as an alternative fuel corridor, so they mostly focus on beefing up electric vehicle infrastructure along there. But you can see in light blue, it's kind of small on the slide, but in light blue are proposed ones. So you can see that 285 and 74 are also going to be potentially added as eligible corridors that, again, could see more EV charging facilities deployed under this program. $1.25 billion is available for community charging, and this allows you to install EV charging facilities on public roads, parks, parking facilities, schools, etc. These grants will really prioritize low to moderate income neighborhoods, rural areas, and so on. A NOFO is expected in winter of 2022. This, of course, links to electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles in our MTP. And once again, each of these programs follows an 80-20 split. Next, we'll look at the Railroad Crossing Elimination Grant Program. This is a $3 billion program. That $3 billion, again, split over 5 years. Projects here will either result in grade separation or closure of crossings altogether, the relocation of tracks, or improve and install protective devices, signals, signs, and other measures. Funds here can be used for planning, review, and design of an eligible project if necessary. We expect to see the NOFO in June of 2022. This links to the MTP themes of safety and rail. And potential uses for this include if you have a railroad crossing that has a high history of injury, fatality, crashes, or near misses, that could be a competitive project. Or maybe you have a high traffic area that only has a crossing with crossbucks, for example. That could be a crossing that's eligible for upgrades under this program. Again, this is an 80-20 split for cost share. Next. This program is pretty similar to the Advanced Technologies program that we discussed at the start of this, but this is the Strengthening Mobility and Revolutionizing Transportation program. This one is a demo project focused on smart cities or community technologies and systems to improve efficiency and safety. So a lot of the things that we spoke about earlier about automation coordination, ITS improvements, and sensor-based infrastructure, this will all be eligible under the SMART program as well, just in a demo context. Next steps, we do anticipate the NOFO will be released in September of 2022. And this program is unique compared to the other ones in that no non-federal cost share is required. So 100% of the money could come from the federal government for these projects. Next. I'll go over this one pretty briefly because the application window is closing at the end of the month for this one, but this is infra. These are programs that support freight and highway projects of national or regional significance. $7.2 billion is available over the next 5 years. And what we can see is that eligible projects are really focused on improving safety, generating economic benefits, reducing congestion, and eliminating freight bottlenecks. So a lot of these projects will focus on the national highway system. We see that Ncdot has a history of winning infra grants, with one of the most recent ones running from Asheville down to the coast. Applications again close for May 2022 of this year, but this can really fund a lot of major projects, especially ones related to rail, highway improvements, roadway modernization, and so on. The cost share for this has been 60% federal, 40% local match, unless it's a small project, which again is valued at under $100 million, and that would follow your standard 80-20 split. Next. Very similar to the prior one, this is the Mega Projects program, and this one is really focused on tackling the large and complex projects that would otherwise be difficult to fund by other means. So this one does have a cost share of 90% federal to 10% local match, and the projects here really focus on the national highway system, including the freight network, and you could also spend this money potentially on intercity passenger rail as well. The applications do close in May 2022, and they follow the same exact application process actually as the infra program. Next. This one is Safe Streets and Roads for All. Staff have recently attended many webinars on this one. This is a $5 billion program available over the course of the next 5 years. And projects will either fund the ability to develop a comprehensive safety action plan. So if your community is interested in starting a Vision Zero, that's an eligible use for that money. It also allows you to conduct planning, design, and development activities for projects that are already identified in a comprehensive safety action plan, like maybe a walkability or a bike ped master plan. And then finally, funding is available for carrying out those projects and actually doing the construction on them as well. 40% of the money is already designated for planning grants, but the other 60% is eligible for implementation use. The NOFO has been released as of this weekend, and the application is due in September of 2022. Of course, many projects, including bicycle and pedestrian and complete streets, are eligible. To name a couple of complete streets projects that are proposed in the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, you've got Wautown complete streets as well as MLK streetscape projects that might fit this pretty well because again, it really emphasizes vulnerable user safety and complete streets. Next. Next program we'll talk about is the Reconnecting Communities pilot program. This is a $1 billion program spread out over 5 years, and it's really focused on addressing the legacy impacts and resulting inequities from urban freeway construction historically. So eligible projects will either remove, retrofit, or mitigate highways or other barriers to community connectivity. And this funds both planning and construction projects. We anticipate that the NOFO will be out in June of 2022. This could fund a wide range of projects, potentially ranging from bike and ped, safety projects, roadway modernization projects, complete streets projects, transit enhancements. And potential local application could be the mitigation of US 52, because historically we know the background of US 52 and how it bisected many predominantly Black communities. And now a project that either enhances transit in that area or improves walkability in that area could be a good fit. This program follows a cost share of 80% federal to 20% local match, like many of the others. Next. The last one we'll discuss in detail is the PROTECT program. This is both a formula and a discretionary program, as you might have noticed. We'll talk about the discretionary side of things. These grants will support resilience improvements, including evacuation route enhancement and planning and general resilience planning. So if there's an area that is particularly susceptible to flooding, this program might fund a project that helps reduce the odds of that occurring. The NOFO is anticipated in the second half of 2022, and this links to the Mtip themes of resilience and reliability. It follows a cost share standard of 80% federal to 20% local match. The next ones I will not discuss, but they are available for your viewing, and they're just general tables of other funding opportunities that are available for local governments. And then if you go to the very last slide, we'll just let you know that we are continuing to monitor the release of bipartisan infrastructure law funds. We'll continue to share NOFOs with everyone here in the community and provide updates on new programs as they're established and administered. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to field them now or field them anytime by email. And thanks everyone for your time.
Thank you, Hunter. Are there any questions for Hunter? I know he shared a lot of information on a lot of projects, very good information, and the slides I think would be helpful just to go back for reference as you're making considerations for your local areas. But are there any questions for Hunter?
Hey, Tanique, this is Pat. Just as a reminder to everybody, this was really, really good information. But as we've talked about in the past, whenever we have federal funding, we do have to look at that 20% match, especially if there's an expectation that they want any part of that match to be state funds. Because as you know, STI does require that the use of any state funds go through the STI process, which can be problematic if you've got projects that have not gone through that process. So just as a reminder.
Thank you, Pat. Very good.
Pat, would you mind also repeating that at our TAC later today? That would be much appreciated.
I will be happy to.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
All right. Any other thoughts or questions? Very well.
Just really quick, what Pat was saying essentially is if we want to take any of these monies related to this and we want to spend it, it should probably be in the STI because it would probably be designated potentially as state as well if you're doing the 2080.
Unless you want the match to be all local funds.
Okay, got it.
All right. Thank you, thank you. All right, we will move on to our staff reports. So I will start with Ncdot Division 9. Pat, you're up.
My report is self-explanatory. There are no real significant changes since the last time we discussed this. Obviously, as we move forward, some of these will change based on the the new TIP, but unless there are any questions, I'll leave it at that.
Any questions for Pat? All right, the Winston-Salem Urban Area MPO Transportation Project Update. Kelly?
Yes, ma'am. No real updates on mine. Of course, this is also gonna change once we do our, once we include the adopted approved projects to this list.
Very good. Questions for Kelly? All right, Ncdot Transportation Planning Update. Andy?
Hi, folks. My packet's in the or my updates in the packet. One of the things I'll point out there is North Carolina Clean Transportation Plan via Governor Cooper's Executive Order 246 about a clean economy. If you can, please, yourselves and to your stakeholders, consider taking the transportation plan survey. That's a link available on that. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you, Andy. Any questions for Andy? All right, Ncdot Integrated Mobility Division. Alex, is he on this call?
Yes, ma'am. There we go. Good afternoon, everybody. Alex Schuttenberry with IMD. Not too much to report today. We did finish up the call for projects ended for our multimodal competitive grant process that we fund every year. And so we'll be working with a group of folks to help score those projects and make those awards for later this year. Other than that, we've got some stuff kind of cooking on the back burner, but not quite ready to talk about that yet. So that's all I've got. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Alex. Any questions for Alex? All right, FHWA update. Suzette, is Suzette on this call? No? All right. Let's see, Piedmont Triad Regional Council of Governments update. Carter. All right, Forsyth County OEAP Air Quality Update. Carrie, I know you're on the call.
I am. I had nothing really to add beyond what's in the packet. I will say that we are issuing a code orange for ozone tomorrow for the triad, so just take it easy up there. Hopefully the air quality will improve quite a bit over the weekend, but in the transportation aspect of things, no, I don't have anything to add beyond what's in the packet.
Very good. Any questions for Carrie? All right, Bicycle and Pedestrian Facility Projects Update. Matthew?
Thank you, Tanique. I don't have anything to report right now.
Very good. Any questions for Matthew? All right, Winston-Salem Transit Authority update. Donna?
Good afternoon again. I don't have anything to add other than what's in the packet, but if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to address them.
All right, any questions for Donna? Okay, the Piedmont Authority for Regional Transportation update. Let's see, Scott's. Is he here?
I'm here, Tanique. Mark?
Mark is here. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, no, thank you. Couple of quick travel demand model updates with a very, in the world of modeling, a very exciting meeting this morning, in that we are just a few weeks away from finally having a completed tour-based freight model to be able to use as part of our overall travel demand model. This is going to open up some real possibilities for some regional freight plan should we decide to do so, and or including freight as a factor in the spot process. We'll be learning more about the capabilities of the model in the coming months, but it does open up a lot of great possibilities for getting deeper into freight planning and the infrastructure required to move the goods and services across our region. Second thing is we are moving along with our what I'm now referring to as our scenario planning growth allocation project, which is using the community viz software to do scenario planning to help create the socioeconomic data for our next base year update. And we've got a meeting coming up with our stakeholders next Friday to sort of re-energize that project. There's some key dates coming up as it relates to the base year update. For those and moving forward with that. And hopefully within several months, we will actually be able to show some growth allocation results out of this effort. And then finally, we are again very close within a day or a couple of weeks of kicking off our household travel survey project for the region. This again is a very key component to our base year update. We will need to be able to collect 4,800 surveys from people from across the region. And by people, I mean you and me as well. So we'll be able to participate. There's some incentives. Families, friends, everyone will be encouraged to attend. We'll be asking the NPOs to help with the promotional aspects of this in terms of using all the resources that an NPO and cities have, communicate this opportunity to people across the region. And the full survey will be completed hopefully by the end of the fall of this year. And we'll see the full results early next year. And not only, again, as I may have mentioned before, not only can these results be used within the regional travel demand model, they're going to provide a wealth of information about household travel across the region for NPOs to use in all of their transportation planning processing. So some exciting developments there in the transportation planning modeling world. Be glad to answer any questions anyone wants.
Very good, Mark. Are there any questions for Mark? All right, then Davidson County Transportation, Richard.
Good afternoon. Yeah, a couple things. One, we're knee deep in our transition to becoming a direct recipient with FTA and doing all the paperwork and all that kind of fun stuff. And hopefully that should be done and on schedule, and we'll be direct recipients as of July 1st is the IMD and our goal for that. We're also working on the materials for a compliance audit from IMD. We haven't had one of those in a while, so that's also another whole bunch of fun that we're working on. We're a little busy.
Just a little.
Yeah.
Any questions for Richard? Or anyone volunteering to go help him out?
Yeah, we'll take all comers.
Very good, Richard. Good luck. All right. Title VI compliance update. Marlene, I think she left. So MPO calendar of activities. Byron.
Nothing to add. I just wanted to point out that included in the calendar table are important P7 work group and draft STIP schedule dates. This is in the back, easy reference for you. That's it.
Very good. Any questions for Byron? Ethics liaison, Kelly.
Nothing to add. We're done with our ethics season, so.
Okay, very good. All right, our next meeting. Well, were there any last thoughts, updates? Okay, then our next meeting is scheduled for July 21st. Look forward to seeing everyone, and I guess we're ready to adjourn. Can I get a motion and second?
Motion to adjourn.
Yes.
Second.
Very good. Thank you. We are adjourned. Everyone have a great afternoon. And for those of you that are joining us, we will see you at 4 o'clock at TAC.
Thank you.